Welcome back to class. I'm Omomi Folani, your English tutor from the Royal Tutors. Today we're going to master a key skill for GCSE English, which is inference. And at the end of today's lesson, you will be able to explain what inference is. You'll be able to pick out clues in a text, and you'll be able to use these skills to work out a character's feelings, thoughts, motives, and so on. Now, most importantly, you will also be able to answer inference questions clearly and confidently. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing we need to do is to learn the meaning of inference. So let's look at that. So, simply put, inference is all about reading between the lines. Inference is all about reading between the lines. Now, most of you are used to reading a passage and then answering the questions under it by picking the answer directly from the passage. You just go ahead to read an answer. The way it is written in the passage is the way you write it out as your answer. But that is different when it comes to inference, because you have to read in between the line. Now, how do you read in between the line? You need to understand what the writer implies, and even when it is not stated directly. So in order to be able to read between the lines, you need to understand what the writer implies. Not what the writer has written out directly, but what he implies or what he means using the words that he must have used. Alright, so most of the times these things are not stated directly, but you have to figure it out, and that is what we call inference. Now, one main thing you need to know when it comes to inference is that you must be familiar with clues in a text. Clues are like they are like little things in the text that would point you to what the writer might mean. All right, and then to be able to infer successfully, you need to pick your clues, then add your knowledge. Whatever the clue means to you could be what your inference is. So you pick your clue, add your knowledge to it, and then you have inference. All right, so inference equals to using clues in the text plus your own knowledge to make a logical conclusion. So you use clues in the text, add your own knowledge, and then you can make a logical conclusion. All right, so let's go on from there. Now we're going to go on to look at the difference between literal and inferential meaning. Literal and inferential meaning. Now, literal meaning is what the text says directly. Directly means what is stated out, what you can see at first glance. All right, what's the meaning that you can get from it at first glance. That's what literal meaning is. So it is what the text says directly. But inferential is different. It is what the text implies or suggests. It's what the text implies or suggests. All right, so an example of that, you have, he gripped the steering wheel tightly. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. So gripped, to grip something means to hold, right? So that is what the literal meaning will give you, because that is what the text says directly. So literal meaning of that is holding the wheel. But when you come to the inferential meaning, it does not mean he's holding the wheel any longer. It means that he might be nervous, stressed, or angry. Judging by how much he's holding the wheel. He's not just holding, he's not just placing his hands on the wheel, he's gripping it tightly. So that might mean something else. Now the clue here is gripped tightly. All right, it's gripped tightly, and the knowledge of that, somebody gripping something tightly could mean that the person is nervous. All right, and as we have here, it might be nervous, stressed, or angry. Notice that the writer doesn't say he is nervous. So right now the writer did not state it directly that he's nervous. Instead, it gives us a clue. We've been given a clue here to figure out what the writer means, and that is what inference is. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. The inference formula. For you to be able to infer successfully, for you to be able to use the skill inference, this is what you need to know: the clue and then the knowledge. You have to put into consideration the clues you can find in the text, and then the knowledge, which is what you can deduce from the clues, and then you'll be able to get your inference. All right, so we move on from there. Also, identifying clues. Now I've been mentioning clues. And clues. Now we need to learn how to identify clues in a text. When making inferences, the first step is spotting clues. We've said that the first thing you need to do to be able to make inference is to spot clues. Now, clues come in many forms. They can come in different forms. You have body language. It could be in form of body language. All right, it could be shaking hands, it could be slumped shoulders, it could be clenched fists, and so on and so forth. So one of the ways, or in looking out for clues, you look out for body language. Apart from that, you can look out for facial expressions, which could be frowning, biting lips, forced smile, and so on and so forth. And you can also have dialogue. Dialogue means conversation between two or more people. So it could be hesitation, it could be short answers, it could be silence, and so on and so forth. Now, apart from dialogue, you also have actions. It could be the action, what is being done, could give you an idea of what is going on. It could be your clue. All right, it could be leaving quickly, pausing, slamming doors, and so on and so forth. All right, another thing you should look out for when spotting clues is the setting or the atmosphere, which could be dark, foggy, cold, abandoned, and so on. All of this have something they are pointing to. They have an hidden meaning in it, so you have to figure it out yourself. And then you have objects, which could be letters, photos, broken items, and so on and so forth. So now that we figured out ways in which you can identify clues, let's have an example. She bit her lip and avoided eye contact as she handed over the envelope. She bit her lip and avoided eye contact as she handed over the envelope. Now, first things first, because we're trying to make inference here, we have to figure out the clue. All right, so the clues here are bit her lip and then avoided eye contact. So what does it mean when someone bites their lips or when they avoid eye contact? That is where your knowledge comes in. You have to think about what it means. All right, so and then you'll be able to make your inference. Now for this one, it says she's nervous or hiding something. So it could mean that the person is nervous or hiding something. That is why she bit her lip or avoided eye contact. All right, and then we move on from there. Now notice how the clue shows emotion without directly saying it. So the clue shows emotion without directly saying. So we're not it's not directly stated that she's nervous or hiding something. Instead, we are provided with clue which gives us the idea of what the answer actually is. Okay, so we move on. Now, we have to look at examples on how you can use the clue plus knowledge formula. All right, we have an example. Tom's hands shook as he fumbled with the key. Tom's hands shook as he fumbled with the key. All right, now, first things first again, we have to look out for the clue. So we have hands shook and then we have fumbled. Now, clue plus knowledge, we have our clues already. How about the knowledge? What does hands shaking mean? What does fumbling with the key, what could it point out to you? All right, because that's the only way you can make your inference. Okay, so the knowledge of that is people often shake when nervous or scared. So when you're nervous or you're scared, it's possible that you shake, you're holding something, it's shaking in your hand, and so on and so forth. In the sake of Tom, he fumbled with the key and then his hands shook. All right. Now we have inference. Now we have to make the inference to really know what is going on with Tom. So Tom is nervous or anxious about what he's about to do. Now this was not stated directly. This nobody told us that Tom is actually nervous, but we were able to pick the fact that Tom is nervous from the clues that were given. All right, so clues, knowledge, very important if you want to successfully make inference. Now notice how we link the clue to our knowledge to explain the inference. That is exactly what inference is. You link the clue that you've been able to pick out to your knowledge, and then you've been able to make inference, and that is what examiners look out for. All right. Now, something also very important in making inferences is using evidences and sentence starters. Evidences and sentence starters. All right. So you have always support your inference with textual evidence. You have a text you're reading, and it's from the text you're trying to make an inference. All right. So you must always pick out evidences from the text. Now, and not for you to easily understand what evidence means, it's your clue. You must pick your clue from the text, and this clue will serve as your evidence to explain why the inference you've made is right or why it should be considered right or wrong. All right, so always support your inference with textual evidence, and then also make use of short, precise quotes. Always make use of short and precise quotes, and avoid copying large chunks of text. Don't copy everything in the text. All you need is the evidence, the clue that points to the answer you're about to give or to the inference you're about to make. You don't need to write everything that has been stated in the text. All right, that is for using evidences. And when we come to sentence starters, examples, you have this suggests that. So when you have once you've picked out your clue or your evidence, then you tell us what that clue or evidence suggests. So in order to do all of that, you can use sentence starters like this suggests that, this implies that, we can infer that, this indicates, and so on and so forth. All right, now example, he glanced at the door, then back at the letter. He glanced at the door, then back at the letter. Now, what does this say about the man? The answer, first things first, the clue here is glanced at the door. So you have the answer, you have the phrase glanced at the door, which is the textual evidence. Don't forget that you always use evidence, and then you move on to sentence starters. So the phrase glanced at the door suggests that he is hesitant to open the letter, possibly anxious about its contents. Now here we've been able to pick out our textual evidence from the text, and then we use the sentence starters, and then we use a sentence starter to explain what the evidence or the clue means. All right, notice we included the quotes, made the inference, and explained why it fits exactly what you are saying. Don't forget that we're still trying to make inferences. All right, we've talked about picking out clues. We've talked about adding our knowledge to the clue to make inference. Now we're talking about using evidences from the text, textual evidence, and then making use of sentence starters to explain what our evidence means. All right, so we move on from there. Now we go to answering exam questions. This is the main thing we need to focus on now, how to answer exam questions under inference. So let's see how that is done. Now, to be able to write an effective answer, you will need to write a PEE response to the question. Now, this is a formula that will help you all the time to answer inference questions. All right, you need to make use of a PEE response. Now, what does PEE mean? P stands for make a point, which is point. The first E stands for evidence, and then the last E stands for explain or explanation. All right, now what does point mean? Point simply means the answer you're given to the question. For instance, in the last example that we looked at, it says, what does this say about the man? Now, the answer you will give is the point. You have to make a point. All right, okay, the man is angry, for instance. The man is angry. Now, that is your point. Fine. But you don't stop at making a point, because again, this is inference. The answer is not stated in the text. So you have to explain to us, you have to give us evidence as to why the answer is the man is angry. All right, so you don't stop at making a point alone, you move on to evidence. Now, what is the evidence? Evidence is the quotes, your textual evidence. Don't forget that. The clue. All right, so you have to quote it, you have to also write it out. After making a point, you give us the evidence from the text, textual evidence. Don't forget, I said do not ignore the text in all you're doing, because that's where you're going to pick your evidence from, and then it's the evidence that is needed to explain your point. All right, so you use a quote from the text to back up your explicit answer. And then the last thing you need to do is explain. Tell us why your evidence or tell us how your evidence points to your answer. All right, explain. Writing a considered response to show you have understood the question in your own words. This 3-step is what you need to do to answer inference questions in the exam. So let's look at examples and let's see how it goes. Now, example, Lisa looked out of the window and sighed heavily when she saw white everywhere. She had to go to work regardless of what she saw. So reluctantly, she put on a hat, a big furry coat, and thick woolen gloves. When she got to work, she noticed her nose was an interesting shade of blue and her teeth were chattering. I hate this weather, she thought and shivered, trying to warm up with others in front of a small heater in the corner of the room. Mr. White, her boss suddenly walked in. What's going on? Get back to work now. We can't have people being lazy. This order is due out today. Now that is a passage, so let's see the questions that were asked under it. All right. Question. What sort of weather is Lisa going to work in? That's the question. What sort of weather is Lisa going to work in? What inference in the text has given you a deduction or hidden meaning of this? Now, first things first, it is not stated in the passage what sort of weather Lisa is going to work in. So what do you do? Because you need to answer this question. You look out for clues. All right? You look for clues. All right? There is she saw white. There is white everywhere. There is teeth chattering, and so on and so forth. All right? So you need to look out for clues. Now, let's see what the answer is. Now, answer 1. Lisa is going to work and it is cold. Now, this is one answer. But based on what the PEE method, this does not work at all. This does not work at all because the only thing we have here is points. We only have a point here. There is no evidence and there is no explanation. So let's look at another answer and see how this should be answered. The sort of weather that Lisa is going to work in is snow. That is the point. Remember I said the point is the answer you give first. All right, you've been asked what sort of weather Lisa is going out in. So the first thing you have to say is give us the answer. The sort of weather that Lisa is going to work in is snow. That is your point. Now the next thing is your evidence. How do you know that that is the weather she's going out in? I know this because in the text it says she saw white everywhere. That is your evidence or your quote. All right. This suggests that she's going to work after it has been snowing, as the snow seems to have given the effect of white everywhere. Now you have given us your evidence and you have explained why you think your evidence points to your answer, which is the snow. So this is how you need to answer the question in the exam going forward. All right. So let's look at another example. When Abdul opened the door, the house seemed strangely quiet. Something didn't seem right. Normally, he would have heard them on their PlayStation or watching TV after they'd done their homework. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed floating carelessly above his head a solitary balloon floating magically, gliding slowly across the top of the ceiling, brilliant and shiny with the number 33 written on the front of it in glitter. A huge smile crept on his face. Finally, he walked over to the kitchen door at the end of the hall and was suddenly flooded with shouts of surprise and lots of enthusiastic singing. All right, so let's see what the question here is. Question: what special day do you think Abdul is experiencing and how old is he? How do you know? So the first thing you need to do, answer the question, which is your point. So what special day do you think Abdul is experiencing? How old is he and how do you know? So you have to answer this question and then give us evidences and explain your evidence. All right, let's go on. Now, answer 1. I think that it's Abdul's birthday. I know this because in the text, the balloon is floating near the ceiling and it has the number 33 on it. Now, this is a fair answer because it has the point and then it has the evidence to an extent. But this is not a full answer. This is not what you expected to do. All right, so let's look at the second answer and see. I think Abdul is experiencing his birthday. Now, that is a point. All right, evidence. I know this because the balloon gives evidence of this saying the number 33 on it. Now, this is the evidence that is picked from the text. So this is the clue that is picked from the text. All right, to tell us, it points to his age and also the fact that he's celebrating his birthday. Now, explanation. This demonstrates that he is 33. All right, don't forget point, evidence, explanation. Okay, let's look at one more example. Ben's hands shook as he fumbled with the key. Now, we used this earlier in one of the examples, so we just want to give it a better answer here using the PEE method. So Ben's hands shook as he fumbled with the key. What can we infer? We can infer that Ben is nervous or anxious. That's the point, because the text describes how his hands shook and he fumbled with the key. Again, your evidence, the clue. which suggests, now we're going to explain, we're about to explain, which suggests that he is struggling to stay calm and is under pressure or worried about what might happen next. This is a full answer and the best you can have for inference. All right, I hope you understand so far. And then, so let's move on. Now, this is for you. This is for you to attempt. You read the passage below, answer the questions using the PEE method. So now it's left to you to read the passage, just like we've done, and then you go ahead with the question. The question here: the children expect to find a wounded bird. That's the question. So you read the passage, read the question, and attempt to answer it with the PEE method. Okay. In summary, inference means reading in between the lines and using the clues provided and your knowledge to make deduction. Explain the inner. Now you can identify clues by observing body language, facial expressions, dialogue, actions, setting, atmosphere. Those are the ways that we can look out for clues as your evidence. Right? Now the last thing, to be able to give a good answer when answering exam questions, use the PEE